It was well past midnight when I found myself on the long, winding stretch of road that connected one nameless town to another. The GPS had died hours ago, the map was no help, and my phone was barely hanging on with a single bar of reception. The route was supposed to cut my journey time by half, but all it had given me was silence and isolation, the kind that presses in around you until you're practically drowning in it. The road ahead stretched in front of me like a ribbon of ink, disappearing into the darkness, as if swallowed by some gaping maw. I flicked on the high beams, hoping for some comfort, but all they did was expose how narrow the road was, its edges blurred with thick trees that arched over, branches clawing at the sky. After an hour or so, the weight of the silence began to gnaw at me. Every slight creak of the car, every bump in the road felt amplified, echoing in my head. I glanced into the rearview mirror out of habit, expecting nothing, yet somehow still surprised by the darkness staring back at me. A flicker caught my eye, something I almost missed if I hadn't looked again. In the brief flash of light, I thought I saw movement in the road behind me, a shadow. Maybe a trick of the light, or so I told myself. My heart began to thud a little faster, and I tried to shake the feeling off, laughing nervously at my own foolishness. "It's just the road playing tricks on you," I whispered to myself. A few minutes passed, and I felt the weight of fatigue pressing down on me. I was about to roll down the window for some fresh air, when, out of nowhere, I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the road. It was barely lit, just within reach of my headlights, but clear enough to make out the pale outline of a person. They were motionless, their back turned toward me, as if waiting for something. I slowed the car, my instincts screaming at me to just drive, to ignore it, to keep going. But curiosity clawed at my mind, compelling me to stop. I rolled down the window. "Hey!" I called out, the sound of my voice strange and hollow in the thick silence. No response. The figure didn't move. It was odd, that stillness. Too still, like they were frozen in place, almost unreal. I squinted, trying to get a better look, but their face was obscured, hidden by shadows. A shiver crept down my spine. I knew I should drive away, that nothing good could come from this, but my hands wouldn't move from the wheel. I was transfixed, locked in some eerie standoff with a stranger on a deserted road. Suddenly, the figure jerked forward, just a tiny movement, but enough to break the spell. I slammed the gas pedal, my tires squealing as I sped past, refusing to look back. My heart thundered, and my breath came in shallow gasps as the figure faded into my rear view, disappearing into the night. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that some unseen force had shifted, and that I was no longer alone. I glanced into the rearview mirror, expecting to see only the empty road behind me. But there it was, another flash of movement. This time closer, like the figure had somehow followed me, closing the distance between us. Panic surged through me, and I pressed the pedal harder, feeling the car shudder under the strain. The trees outside seemed to blur together, and the road twisted and turned, winding like the coils of a serpent, threatening to devour me whole. As I sped on, the figure appeared again, just ahead in the distance. It stood in the middle of the road, blocking my path. I slammed the brakes, the car screeching to a halt just a few feet away. My pulse hammered, fear freezing me in place as I stared wide-eyed at the figure illuminated by my headlights. This time, I could see its face, or rather, the absence of one. A blank, featureless face stared back at me, as if someone had erased every trace of humanity from it, leaving only a smooth, pale mask. Its head tilted, almost curious, as if it were studying me. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, it raised one hand, pointing directly at me. I screamed, and without a second thought, I swerved around it, tires spinning as I tore down the road. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My heart raced, and every nerve in my body screamed at me to get as far away as possible. The road stretched on endlessly, but there was no escape. My headlights flickered, and the car's engine sputtered as if some unseen force was draining its life. The figure appeared again, closer this time, its blank face mere inches from the windshield. I slammed my hands against the steering wheel, trying to will myself awake, to break free from whatever nightmare I had stumbled into. The car sputtered, then died. The silence that followed was suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. I reached for my phone, desperate for a lifeline, but it was dead. I was alone, stranded in the middle of nowhere, with a nameless horror lurking just outside. I closed my eyes, hoping that when I opened them, the figure would be gone. But when I opened them, it was there, standing right next to the driver's side window, its featureless face inches away from mine. It tilted its head, a gesture that felt oddly familiar, as if it were mirroring my own fear back at me. Then it spoke, its voice a hollow echo that chilled me to the bone. "I've been waiting for you." I screamed, but no sound escaped my lips. My body was paralyzed, frozen in place as the figure leaned closer, its blank face filling my vision until there was nothing else. No escape, no way out. It reached for me, a cold, lifeless hand stretching toward me as the darkness closed in. As I woke up, I found myself on the same road, the car still. There was no figure, no trace of the horror I had just witnessed. But in the rearview mirror, faintly, I could see something that didn't belong. An imprint of a hand pressed against the glass, as if left by some ghostly visitor. The road stretched out before me, waiting, and I drove on,